Hello students, welcome to the next session of organic chemistry, that is hybridization of carbon. Now before we get into the details of hybridization, let's get familiar with two terms first, that is the sigma bond and pi bond. These are the types of covalent bond based on the linear combination of atomic orbitals theory. So let's start with sigma bond. The covalent bond, which is formed by the overlapping of two half-filled atomic orbitals along their axis, that is, by end-to-end overlapping of the atomic orbitals, is known as sigma bond. In this type of axial overlap, the extent of overlap is maximum, and therefore the bond which is formed, that is the sigma bond, is strong in nature. The electron density of the orbitals is concentrated along the line which is joining the two bonded atoms. It is symmetrical about the line joining the two nuclei. Depending on the type of atomic orbitals that participate in their formation, the sigma bonds can be classified into three types. They are SS bond, SP bond, and PP bond. As is obvious from the name of the bond itself, the name is based on the type of orbital that participate in the formation of that type of sigma bond. For example, S orbitals participate in the formation of SS bond. S and P orbitals both participate in the formation of SP bond, and P orbitals participate in the formation of PP bonds. Now let's go through each type of these bonds one by one. So the first type is the SS sigma bond. In this type of bond, the S orbital of one atom overlaps with the S orbital of another atom to give rise to this SS sigma bond. Its example is hydrogen molecule, in which one S orbital of one hydrogen atom, which contains one electron, overlaps with one S orbital of another hydrogen atom, also containing one electron, to give rise to SS sigma bonds. The next type of sigma bond is the SP bond. As the name itself indicates, S orbital of one atom overlaps with P orbital of another atom to give rise to SP sigma bond. Its example is hydrogen fluoride, in which one S orbital of hydrogen atom with one electron overlaps with 2p orbital of fluorine atom, which also has one electron. Please keep in mind that out of the 3p orbitals, 2 will be completely filled, whereas 1 will be half filled in the outermost valence shell of fluorine atom. So that half filled orbital will overlap with 1s orbital of hydrogen atom to give rise to a sigma bond, which is sp in nature. The third type of sigma bond is the pp bond, in which p orbital of one atom overlaps with the p orbital of another atom to form a pp sigma bond. Example is chlorine molecule. Just like fluorine, chlorine atom also has 5 electrons in its outermost p orbitals, that is of valence shell. So out of those 3, 2 are completely filled with 2 electrons each, whereas the third one is half filled with 1 electron. That 3p orbital, which is half filled, will overlap with another half filled 3p orbital of another chlorine atom, and the 2 will give rise to a pp sigma bond. Another type of covalent bond is the pi bond. Please keep in mind that in sigma bond, the overlapping of the orbitals was axial, that is head-on. But in pi bond, the two half-filled orbitals overlap sideways to form this type of bond. This kind of sideways overlapping is less efficient as compared to the axial overlapping, and therefore the pi bond that is formed is weaker in comparison to the sigma bond. The electron density is unsymmetrical and is concentrated above and below the plane of the sigma bond. 2p orbitals form a pi bond. Example is ethylene, that is C2H4, in which this double bond is formed by one sigma bond and one pi bond. When we go through the hybridization in this molecule, we'll learn how exactly this bond is formed. Now, just to get an idea of how atomic orbitals overlap to give rise to a bond, let's take the example of oxygen molecule. We know that the oxygen molecule is formed by two atoms of oxygen. The electronic configuration of oxygen atom, as can be seen here, has two unpaired electrons. Its configuration is 1s2, 2s2, 2p4. Now, out of these three p orbitals, that is px, py, pz, any one of them will have two electrons and the rest will have one electron each. These two electrons may be present in px or py or pz, any of the three. But for the sake of convenience, we assume that two electrons are present in 2px and 2py and 2pz have one electron each. Now, out of these two half-filled atomic orbitals, one half-filled p orbital, let us say py, of an oxygen atom will overlap along the axis with another oxygen atom's half-filled p orbital. That can be any of the two. And they form a pp sigma bond. Now, the remaining half-filled orbital of that oxygen atom will overlap sideways with the other oxygen atom's remaining half-filled p orbital to form a pi bond. Thus, there are two bonds, one sigma and one pi, in the oxygen molecule. These two bonds together constitute a double bond. We can easily understand the formation of bonds in oxygen molecule with the help of this diagram. This blue orbital and this red orbital, these two are the half-filled atomic orbitals of an oxygen atom. These are the two half-filled orbitals of another oxygen atom. As they come closer, this blue orbital will overlap with this blue orbital, that is half-filled orbital of another oxygen atom, along the axis. So these two will overlap and form a sigma bond. As we discussed earlier, the electron density will be concentrated along the line joining the nuclei of the two atoms, that is in the middle, and it will be symmetrical in nature. Now, another p orbital, which is perpendicular to this blue orbital and is denoted by red, will approach another half-filled orbital of the other oxygen atom. This orbital is also denoted by red color for convenience. Now, as they approach closer, they overlap sideways. This lobe will overlap this lobe and this lobe will overlap this lobe. So together they will form a pi bond and the electron densities will be concentrated above and below the plane of the sigma bond. So this diagram shows a double bond between two oxygen atoms.